Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire supported by Glenlivet Books. Why are India's top film directors and film stars upset with the government's proposed changes to the Cinematograph Act? Do they suspect that there is something wrong with the government's intentions? That's the key issue I shall raise today with one of India's most highly regarded film directors and one of the country's most loved film stars, Kamal Haasan. Kamal Haasan, in an article that you wrote for The Hindu very recently, you called the government's proposed amendments to the Cinematograph Act a proposal to muzzle our society's voice of creativity and reflection. Why do you believe this is an attempt to muzzle?
See, as it is, we've been trying to loose the shackles of what was originally called the censor board. We didn't like the word. Independent India should only certify. And this argument found traction very many years later. Though the act was passed in 1952, it's only around the 90s that we started calling it the Film Certification Board. Yes, that was a step forward. But still, having been in the film industry for nearly 60 years now, I've been a child actor, and I have not seen any let-up on what you just quoted as trying to muzzle the voice has been a constant threat hanging over our heads, collective heads, that is. And we were concerned, and while the rest of the world had a free-thinking, free voice, we were regressing, and it's becoming much worse. I was part of a body created by the government, and Benagil Saab was heading it. And none of the recommendations that we had given is reflected here. Some maybe, but not all. And I sincerely believe that any voice is resented by many successful governments, whatever the side of the meter they belong.
Can I ask you a specific question? In your article for The Hindu, you were particularly worried and anxious about the amendment proposed to Section 6 of the Cinematographic Act. Now, that amendment permits the government to request for re-examination of a film certificate on the grounds that it has perhaps breached Article 19(2) of the Constitution, which puts restrictions on free speech. That was the main cause of your anxiety in that Hindu article. Explain to the audience, why is this such a deleterious move on the government's part?
See, the government, as it is in times of war or in times of peacemaking, will be concerned and will take action if films contrary to the attempt by the whole nation to do something is mocked, thwarted, or diverted due to some film's comment. They can act, they can sue, but it cannot be banned. I have been the victim of a state government which decided to shut down a film. Even without these amendment bills, they were able to do it. I have seen it, but I had recourse to the court, and we did file a case against the Tamil Nadu government, and the courts prevailed, and we won the case.
You're talking about Vishwarupan and the problem you had in 2013, and I'll come to that in a moment's time. But do you believe that the present proposed amendments to the Cinematograph Act, and in particular the amendment to Section 6, is actually an attempt to censor? Is that your concern?
Not even censor. It's, as I rightly have carefully worded, it's to muzzle the voice or muffle the voice, if you want to make it even softer. But I think that this would be an attempt. It's I'm not talking about the left or the right. Any government who tries to do it, voices like mine will come up vociferously.
So what the government through that amendment is trying to do is to muzzle or muffle not just creativity, but also voices like yours that may choose to be critical, that may choose to interpret history differently, that may choose to portray people from the past in a new way. That creativity, that right of yours to reinterpret is being muzzled and muffled. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, the collective introspection is very important. And if you keep muzzling these voices, then reason cannot be put forth for everyone to see.
Now, the government's
Then,
claim is that, in fact, all they're doing is to ask for re-examination of certification on the grounds that the original certification may have breached Article 19.2 of the Constitution, which, as you know, puts limits on free speech. So the government says, we're only fulfilling what the Constitution requires us to do. How do you respond to that defense from the government?
I can understand that argument holding water if the board constituted is totally done by the film industry. Then there's a possibility that there's no operational procedure that the government could keep a watch on. In this case, the certification board is constituted by the government and is constantly watched by the I&B department. So to get worried and thinking that they might have erred talks about your constitution of the board might be erroneous. It's your fault.
In other words, you're
Not
saying if the government constitutes the board, it's its own nominees and people. Therefore, A,
Yes.
trust your people, but B, if you're then going to use the constitution to overturn what your own people have done, then you suspect that that constitution is being used as an excuse to actually muzzle and muffle creativity, to remove attempts to expose the government's incompetence and malgovernance. In other words, they are using the constitution as a smokescreen behind which they will muzzle.
That's a suspicion, and they want to keep all doors open. You can't do that. Not in a situation which is in camera. The censor board does print out what happened and why they made the decision and put it for their people to see for what has been removed sometimes to give a certain certification. It came from the original idea of what has been censored. Here, the certification tells you that certain demography, age group can see the film and you certify it accordingly. And so it's a requirement of the producer to lose some of his film to gain more audience.
Okay. You very effectively dismiss the government's claim that they are only acting in line with the Constitution. You're saying they're actually using the Constitution as a smokescreen behind which they will muzzle creativity, they will censor, they will prevent criticism. Let me put a second defense the government makes. The government says, we're only requesting re-examination, and the chairman of the Central Board of Film Certification can either refuse the request altogether, or he can re-examine and still stand by the original certification. How do you respond to that second defense?
I think the board is yours. When I say yours, I'm talking to the government. And so they're going to comply, and especially when it's coming from the top, even if it's a request. The request is actually a veiled command coming from the top.
So you don't believe the chairman of the board will defy the government and say, sorry, I reject your request, or sorry, I've examined the film, but the original decision was correct. You don't believe the quality of the board will lead to a board defying the government?
That kind of valor is very rare. We have seen that, be it in the Election Commission or any other commission by the government. This kind of valor of standing by your opinion is very rare, and we don't like to toss up and wait for the results.
And in fact, I suspect that if the board is appointed by the government will ensure that the people it appoints don't stand up to it, but agree to do its bidding. That's another concern you have.
Yes, of course, because I've been there. I've been to almost all the certification discussions, at least those produced by my company, and also other companies where I've worked, where I've felt close to the content of the film. So I must have attended about 100 certification discussions, at least
And your
a
feeling
100.
is, and your feeling
That
from your
the
experience is that those 100 certificate discussions you've attended has proven to you boards don't stand up to the government. If they're appointed to
no,
by
no,
the government, they're loyal to the government.
yes, they're appointed by them, they're loyal to the government, they're given certain do's and don'ts which they go by, and there are parties which are strongly recommended. Represented in the group. They
Let
see
me
to it.
Let me, Mr. Hassan, at this point, put to you what someone who you have worked with, someone you admire, you were a member of his committee, as you mentioned a moment ago, has said. I'm talking about Shyam Benegal and an interview that Mr. Benegal gave the Hindustan Times on the 1st of this month. And I'm quoting him now. He was questioned about the proposed amendments, the amendments that you are critical of, the amendments that you believe will actually permit the government to censor. And this is what he said. I'm quoting, I think it's fine. There are no major problems here. What do you make of that?
I don't know, sir. I'm talking about Mr. Benegal, who was sitting with us and arguing for us. That time he sounded much younger than me when he spoke to me, and I was surprised myself because I was treading carefully and he was very firm. But I don't know. I respect his wisdom. I'd like to have a discussion with him. But then, as I told you, the rare valor that I was speaking about sometimes resides in me also. So I will still stand to my ground in spite of my respect for Mr. Benegal.
So in this instance, you completely disagree with Mr. Benegal's viewpoint.
I'll have to have a discussion with him to understand what he meant by it. I respect him a lot, and I've taken advice from him many times before. But on this, my experience is uh, is a lot. I mean, he
Let,
can't
let
look
me
down upon my experiences.
let me put you something else that Mr. Benegal said in that Hindustan Times interview. He was asked, is he worried that this power to request re-examination of certification could mean that many old films get re-examined and their certification changed? And again, this is his answer. If a film is given a certificate, it does not mean that is forever. There are some things that have been valid at one point of time in the past, and they may not be valid today. So recalling films for another review is not a big deal.
No, I beg to disagree with him on that point. And I would like to have this discussion one on one with him instead of uh, denying him an opportunity to argue or debate or
I should,
enlighten me.
in fairness to the audience, point out that 2 days ago, Mr. Benegal gave an interview to PTI where it seems that, in fact, he's changed his view. The new view has not been sadly, clearly, and unequivocally expressed. But from what you can tell from that interview, it does look and sound as it's different to what he said to the Hindustan Times. I should fairly point that out. But let
No,
me.
I think you literally been reading between lines. So I only spoke of my experience with him. I found him with a foot forward, tackling the situation,
And
and I was being
undoubtedly
careful.
one of the
And
great directors our country has. Let me come back to your views, because it's your views beautifully expressed in that Hindu article that are my main focus of attention today. I'm going to quote something you wrote in that article. You say, the draft bill will restrict freedom of speech and put a gag on the film fraternity. preventing filmmakers from making films on bad governance, social evils, and so on. If that turns out to be the case, then the very nature, quality of the Indian film industry will change. What makes an industry special will have been wrenched out because the freedom to criticize, to interpret, to represent, to be different, to be critical will all go because the government will simply say, change the certification.
Yes. See, the soapbox oratory opportunity that was offered to the British populace in the times of monarchy, even that had a little more freedom. At least you let off some steam. You might be arrested later when you turn the corner after your speech is another matter. But there was this steam where, a podium where you could let off. You can speak any kind of nonsense and you'll be free.
You're
Yeah,
referring
even that. But cinema is not a soapbox oratory. It's much more. And we have seen what happens when a government takes over this medium and uses it for its personal propaganda. Mr. Goebbels and the one film called Triumph of Evil, Triumph of Will. I call it evil. I think that's a Freudian slip. The Triumph of Will is a fantastic example as how the medium, very sharp and a medium that could mold the collective mind.
The audience will have heard you in that answer refer to Goebbels. Are you saying that this proposed amendment is Goebbelsian?
It doesn't matter because we use the word Goebbelian and the word fascist. These are bad words, whether it comes from the right or from the left. It doesn't matter. We've seen these things happen during emergencies, and there were voices raised. These kind of gags of a different sort was put on people, filmmakers. Filmmakers have died in jail.
Absolutely.
We've seen that.
And as you say, the word Goebbels may be a bad word today because of its historical context, but that doesn't deny the fact that what the government is attempting with these amendments looks and feels and seems very similar to what Goebbels did. That's the point you're making.
Yes. Why even blame only a government? The Catholic Church was censoring films in Italy.
Quite right.
The church representative would come and sit and decide what will go into the film. Those days have changed. We fought those battles to come to this day, and we don't want to regress.
Let me dig a little deeper into this proposed amendment. What this proposed amendment would permit is if any member of the public were to write to the government to object to the certification either of a new film or even an old film, which could be 3, 4, 10 years old, the government, on that basis of 1 or 2 people writing, can ask for re-examination. This means this amendment also opens the way for busybodies, for interfering people who have no locus standi to request the government. They could be supporters of the government, and the government will set in motion a process that could lead to re-examination and recertification.
See, the films are reflections of a society. It may not be as precise as the news on a newspaper that you see, but it is also part of the history, the films that we create and we mold. We make a film about independence. I made Hey Ram. I looked at it from a tangential point of view, but this is all part of our history. What you're trying to do by certification of these films, you're trying to change history itself.
Absolutely. Then let me, in this background, put you something that many believe makes this whole amendment actually even worse than it seems on paper. Because this amendment, if it gets passed, will happen 2 months after the abolition of the Film Certification Appellate Tribunal. Now, once that tribunal is abolished, any aggrieved party with a CBFC decision has only one option, one remedy, and that's to go to a high court. And high courts are slow and high courts are expensive. Now, in the absence of that tribunal, if the CBFC decides to re-examine or recertify, the only remedy left to you is to go to the High Court, which is slow and expensive. That makes this whole amendment even worse.
Yes, it's a warning saying that it's going to cost you so much if you're going to be a caustic critic of either the government or the country. It's going to cost you this much, and they've literally given you the bottom line of how much is it going to cost for free speech.
And that's an awful lot of money and an awful lot of time, because high courts are expensive and lengthy procedures.
Especially at a time now when India is going international with the OTT platform, the contents are not regulated even by the money bags. It's directly driven by the audience, which is a great thing for a filmmaker, a young filmmaker who's changing his gizmos have changed, his modus operandi has changed, the techniques have changed, and his valor is also changed. He's more brave than the previous generation.
And the government is throwing a spanner in the middle of this.
In this work.
Absolutely.
That's in progress, work in progress, and a spanner ready, poised to be thrown.
But let me ask you first, how much has your personal experience with Vishwarupam in 2013 made you even more concerned about the amendment the government is presently considering? How much has your own experience said to you, we cannot afford to go down this road again?
No, apart from the fact that it cost me a lot of money, the government thought that would break me. It did, because the total loss that came up to, the bottom line is about 60 crores for me. Fortunately, the audience have kept me in a position where I could charge that much for a film, and I had to re-earn that money. It could totally finish somebody off. Maybe it might be a Guru Dutt of today.
Quite right. You're saying the cost that will follow if the CBFC,
but what affected me most,
could break a filmmaker.
Yes, and what affected me most was not even the money. It is the fact that I am not respected. The content was not even seriously looked into. The censor board was just swept aside. Some body of people decided it's a movie against a particular community, which is not right, because that was not my intent.
Absolutely.
This has happened to me.
Worse than
this has happened.
Worse than the financial cost is the hit.
For example, I'll tell you,
hey Ram, intelligence and your creativity.
Yeah, let me quote by my example. I made a film nearly 20 years back called Hey Ram. This time, the voice came from the secular Indian party, the Congress. And a politician, a lady who has not seen my film, assumed that this film is anti-Gandhi and said it should be banned. And all efforts were made to ban the film.
And this is why the government's proposed amendment is so bad, because it allows single people or single groups of vested interest to petition the government, and then the government, particularly if these people are its allies and supporters, will on their behalf request recertification. It will cost a lot of money to film directors. It will question their integrity and their artistic merit. And the whole thing is a problem that damages creativity.
Not only creativity, people who just want to do it for the sake of slandering or damaging, as you said, throwing the spanner in the works. All they have to do is write a report and the film goes back for examination.
Mr. Hassan, I have two more questions before I end. 7 years into the Modi government, it's no great secret that this government doesn't tolerate dissent and criticism. It doesn't like it. It's no great secret to say this government persecutes its critics. Let me cite just one solitary example. Between 2016 and 2019, cases of sedition have increased by 165%. Are you worried that this Cinematographic Act amendment is one more step in that direction? It may only be a small step, it may only affect filmmakers and film stars, but nonetheless, it's another step in the same direction.
Yeah, it would become instead of using other European models. Let me tell you, remind you of ourselves of the time when Mr. McCarthy set up a House of Un-American Activities inquiry,
Why?
and some of the greatest filmmakers became inactive. Some of the greatest writers ran away to other countries and wrote with pseudonyms. One of them was Dalton Trumbo. Chaplin had to leave the country
Quite
and
right. That's a very, very
permanently
telling example.
settle permanently in Switzerland.
The impact McCarthy had on Hollywood is not something our audience will be aware of, but you're absolutely right to bring it out. Great film writers like Trumbull stopped writing, or they had to write under other people's names. They couldn't take
Yes.
credit. And as you said, Chaplin left the country. It was a chilling effect on Hollywood, and you're saying something similar could happen in India as a result of this amendment.
It is not paranoia. My fear and legitimate fear is that something worse could happen in today's time when we have progressed way ahead of the times of McCarthy. Technically speaking, about moving images are not merely anymore in the film theaters alone.
You know
And
what?
as I predicted,
What you're saying is frightening when you say, and you said it very carefully in a very considered way, something worse could happen because of the advance of technology between McCarthy's time of the 50s and today in 2021. And that's frightening because in a democracy, it actually affects the very fundamental rights of free speech, free expression, free creativity. It will change India, won't it? It will be one of the things that could change India.
it could change the way free thinking uh, progresses. Uh, and when I say rational, I don't mean denying God. I mean, looking at anything with a rationale will be lost because it will be given a tilt, a bias, which can be monitored. I mean,
In which case,
what I'm saying is justice, as we know, is the blindfolded lady holding out a balance, can now see and monitor and even hold the middle needle in position.
my last question. You have been courageous, you've been bold, you've been forthright, you've expressed yourself fully. You've even compared what the government is doing to girls. More importantly, you've compared it to the chilling effect in America of McCarthyism and the impact that had on people like Trumbull or people like Chaplin. But you're one of the few rare voices to speak up. I know there have been a few other directors, Vishal Bhardwaj has spoken up, but Indians will ask themselves the question, why are great film stars like Amitabh Bachchan, Shah Rukh Khan, Salman Khan, Amir Khan, Akshay Kumar, Aishwarya Bachchan, Kajol, why are they silent? This affects their careers. This affects the industry that's made them famous. This could affect their future, but not a word from any of them. Literally complete and total silence. As a fellow
I
film
think
star, how do you explain this?
I think your effort, this interview, and many more like this would break that silence because I can only think that they're taking it lightly and not going back into history to reflect or going forward in times to guess what could happen when we proceed in this direction.
So when you say that you hope this interview will break their silence, are you also saying they need to speak up? Their voices should be heard.
Absolutely, because no, it is not that they are not uh, with a conscience or they're scared. Because I know Mr. Amir Khan personally said when Mr. Kamal Haasan was in trouble by a government, I did not speak. I should have spoken then. I was so busy with my film, I didn't realize that this is a great opportunity to keep our democracy together. I should have voiced. I used this podium to say sorry to Mr. Kamal Haasan. That's what he said.
But
So I expect him to come forward.
he's repeating the mistake again. Once again, he's silent. And this time, he's not alone. Salman Khan, Amir Khan, Abhishek Bachchan, Amitabh Bachchan. I mean, these are people who made a lot of money from the film industry. I don't begrudge it. It's their right. They're brilliant actors, but they've made a fortune from this industry. And their popularity is because of this industry. Now, when a principle is at stake, it seems profit and popularity is more important than standing up for principle. Isn't that sad?
There were many lawyers in India, but it took a few of them to gather together, and one of them was Mr. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Valor is something you'll have to make up your mind on. Vision is something you have to make up your mind on. And I'm not commenting on my brethren. I'm not criticizing them. I can understand their fears because I've been on the ledge, standing there, feeling the same fears. But I fought over it and continued my battle, and I am continuing it even today.
Okay, that's very clear. You're not commenting, you're not criticizing, but you have said that you hope this interview will break their silence. You did say that they're taking it lightly. So, my very last question, this is, in a sense, a personal test for each and every one of them. History will remember whether they spoke or whether they kept silent.
Yes, they will remember because news as we read it is also history. It'll go down in history as such.
Yes, indeed. Mr. Hassan, I thank you for speaking to me so fully, so openly, and in particular, for also making it clear that this is a moment when history will remember who spoke out and who kept quiet. I thank you for speaking out. It can't always be easy because often this government doesn't like critics. Take care, stay safe, and good luck with your movies.
Thank you. Thank you. Namaste.